I remember the click of the cabinet door as clearly as I remember the day I met Mark. It was one of those ordinary mornings that didn't hint at how extraordinary it would become for all the wrong reasons. The sky was pale, half smeared with gray, like even it couldn't make up its mind. I stood in our narrow kitchen, one sock foot tucked behind the other, cradling a coffee mug with both hands like it might steady the jitter in my chest. The mug read World's Okayest Wife, a gag gift from a Christmas party 3 years back. I never really liked it, but Mark thought it was hilarious. Now it felt like prophecy. Mark was at the sink, hair still damp from the shower, adjusting his cufflinks with that same brisk, practiced efficiency he used to iron out business deals. "You seeing clients today?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though the undertone in my voice betrayed me. He didn't look up. Something like that. That was all. No smile. No good morning. Just a flicker of a glance that barely skimmed my face before disappearing into his phone again. He'd been distant for months, but I told myself marriage had seasons. I thought maybe we were in a cold one. Chilly, yes, but temporary. We'd been married almost 18 years. You don't throw that away over a bad season. That's what I told myself. That's what my mother would have said. I watched him sling his laptop bag over his shoulder. "Need anything from the store?" I asked. His hand froze on the doorknob. Then, with a voice as flat as the morning light, he said, "No." Then he left. No kiss. No have a good day. Just the soft click of the door. I didn't know it then, but it would be the last time I'd ever see him as my husband. Hours passed. I worked from the dining room table, half-heartedly tapping away at a spreadsheet, glancing up every time a car rolled down the street. By 3 p.m., I had a knot in my stomach I couldn't shake. I checked his location, gone. Not disabled. Not out of range. Just gone. Like it had been wiped clean. I called once. Then twice. By the 7th attempt, I was pacing the living room in a loop. Window, phone, couch, door. A silent metronome of panic. By 6:30 p.m., I checked our shared bank account and froze. Empty. I checked the other one. The emergency fund we'd agreed to never touch except for absolute necessity. Drained. My breath came short, choppy, like I was running without moving. I dropped onto the couch, the cushion sagging beneath me, and that's when I noticed it. An envelope. Plain white. Thick. Centered perfectly on the coffee table like he'd measured the distance. Inside was a single page. His handwriting, tight and deliberate. "This isn't working. Don't try to find me. The debt is yours." That was it. No "Dear Diane." No apology. No explanation. I sat there, staring at that paper like it was written in a foreign language. Surely this wasn't real. Surely he'd come home, laughing at this elaborate prank, wrapping me in a hug, and saying, "Gotcha, D." But the minutes turned to hours. Darkness fell, and I was alone. By the end of the week, I had a list of debts scrawled in blue ink on legal pads, each one a punch to the gut. 2 maxed-out credit cards I never used. A second mortgage I never signed off on. A business loan taken out in both our names. $500,000 that had vanished into whatever fantasy Mark had built while I was busy clipping coupons and running payroll at the office. I called the bank. I begged. I explained. But I'd signed. Of course I had. Mark always made things sound reasonable. Urgent. Just sign here, D. It's routine. We need this to keep the company afloat. I trusted him. Now I was getting letters in the mail every day. Bold red stamps. Overdue. Final notice. I started keeping them in a shoebox I labeled reality. Then one afternoon I saw him. Of all places, Trader Joe's. I was in sweatpants and a pilled hoodie, comparing prices on frozen vegetables. And there he was, laughing, pushing a cart beside a tall brunette with a tan, and a diamond the size of my resentment. He looked good, like a man who'd been sleeping well, eating out, living light. I ducked behind a rack of organic hummus and watched him lift a bottle of wine, smiling at her like she was the prize at the end of his suffering. She leaned in. He kissed her cheek. And me. I stood with frozen peas in my hand and betrayal thawing in my chest. I left the store without buying a thing. That night, I opened a bottle of red from the cabinet, the one we'd been saving for our anniversary. It was supposed to be for toasts and slow dancing. Instead, I drank it alone while sorting through the stack of legal threats piling on my kitchen table. He left me a ghost town and took the map. But if he thought I was going to fade quietly, he didn't know me at all. It's funny what you notice when your life implodes. The hum of the fridge suddenly sounds louder. The clock ticks with a vengeance. Every creak in the floorboards feels like a memory pressing its thumb into your ribs. I stop sleeping. At first, I blamed the stress, the calls from creditors, the lawyer who kept using words like foreclosure and bankruptcy like they were everyday conversation. But deep down, it was more than that. I was haunted by a question that had no answer. How do you grieve someone who chose to disappear? I kept expecting to wake up and find it was all some elaborate nightmare. That Mark would walk through the door with a sheepish grin and say it was a midlife crisis gone too far. But mornings came and nights dragged on, and the only thing that showed up were more bills. I had to sell the Lexus first. That one hurt more than I expected. We bought it on our 10th anniversary after a year of saving and skipping vacations. I remember how proud he was, how he insisted I drive it off the lot. You deserve something nice, Dee, he said. I guess nice was only temporary. The man at the dealership gave me a pitying look when I explained the situation. Divorce, he asked, barely glancing up. I just nodded. He handed me a check that barely made a dent in what we owed. Back at home, I began the great unraveling. Room by room, I went through what we had, what we'd built, and tried to figure out what could be sold, what could be kept, what could be let go. I found a box in the hall closet marked Mark's office. Inside were receipts for things I didn't recognize. Spa weekends, electronics, a single plane ticket to Aruba, dated 4 months ago. My name wasn't on it. I sank to the floor with that paper in my hand, the carpet rough against my knees, and I let myself cry for the first time since he left. Not quiet tears, but messy, angry sobs that echoed off the walls. He'd been gone 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and I still hadn't told anyone. Not my sister, not my coworkers, not even my best friend, Carla. I didn't know how to say it. Didn't want to see that flicker of pity in their eyes. So I lied. Said Mark was out of town on business. Said he was dealing with some family stuff. But the truth buzzed beneath my skin like a swarm of bees. He left. He walked out. And he left me holding everything. It was Carla who finally forced the truth out of me. She showed up one Sunday with 2 coffees and a box of blueberry muffins, just like she used to when our kids were little. She sat at my kitchen table, looked at the unopened mail stacked in neat piles, and said, "You gonna tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess?" I wanted to lie again, but my face betrayed me. And once I started talking, I couldn't stop. She didn't say much, just listened. Reached over once to hold my hand when I started trembling. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "Diane, we're not going to let him win." I didn't know what she meant then. But the next day, she drove me to a legal aid office downtown. She sat with me through the paperwork, the explanations, the endless forms with fine print that made my eyes ache. The paralegal, a woman named Marcy with kind eyes and a hard edge, listened to everything and then said something that stuck with me. "Debt can drown you, but so can silence. You've got to speak up." That night, I sat at the dining room table and wrote my first ever blog post. I titled it "The Wife Who Got Left with the Bill." I didn't use our full names, didn't even add a photo, but I told the truth. And people read it. I don't know what I expected. Maybe nothing. But by the end of the week, it had over 8,000 views. Strangers sent messages. Women told me their own stories, husbands who walked out, bank accounts emptied, lives upended. I wasn't alone. It didn't fix the debt. Didn't change the fact that my credit score was tanking or that I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. But it did something else. It gave me my voice back. And I wasn't planning to stop using it. I started a ledger. Not the kind you'd think, not numbers, not bills, not the spreadsheet the lawyer wanted me to fill out. No, this one was personal. A leather-bound notebook I'd picked up at a yard sale years ago and never used. I titled the first page, "Things I Lost, Things I Gained." First on the lost list, trust. Right underneath that, my name, because when Mark left, he didn't just vanish. He took pieces of me with him. My certainty, my confidence, the quiet stability I'd built like bricks over 18 years of compromise and Costco runs. Second on the gained list, rage. Not the screaming kind. Not even the type that flares hot and then disappears. No, this was slow burning. It simmered in my bones like an ember waiting for wind. It kept me upright when I felt like collapsing. It whispered, "You survived worse. You're not done yet." A month after the blog post went viral, a woman named Tanya reached out. She ran a podcast for women who'd been financially and emotionally abandoned, economic orphans, she called us. She asked if I'd share my story. I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to be that woman. The one who got left. The one who got duped. But Carla, God bless that woman, she looked at me over her readers and said, "Or you can let him disappear with your story too." So I said yes. The recording took place in a studio that smelled like lavender and dust. I wore my nicest blouse, the one Mark always said was too bright. The sound engineer gave me water, and Tanya held my hand before we started. I told them everything. About the letter, about the debt, about the way he'd looked straight through me for months before he vanished. And when I finished, Tanya leaned in and said, "You've just helped 1,000 women breathe." The episode went live the next week. I listened to it alone in my living room, wrapped in a quilt my grandmother made, drinking cold coffee from a chipped mug. I heard my own voice, shaky at first, then firm, like it belonged to someone who mattered. And then the emails started. Hundreds of them. Women from Wisconsin to New Mexico. Some had been left with children, some with medical bills, some with nothing but a note and an empty driveway. One woman in Arizona sent me a video of herself smashing her ex's garden gnome collection. "Thank you," she said through tears. "Thank you for helping me stop whispering." But the moment that truly broke me came from a name I recognized. Tracy, Mark's ex-wife. I didn't even know she had my email. Her message was short. "He did the same thing to me. Took everything. Disappeared. I tried to warn you once at that fundraiser. You looked happy. I didn't want to ruin that. I'm sorry." I stared at that message for an hour. And then I went digging. Old documents. Financial records. Emails I'd skimmed and forgotten. And sure enough, there it was. A pattern. Mark had done this before. Maybe not exactly like this, but close. Enough to know this was planned. Calculated. He hadn't left because we were broken. He left because he'd finished using me. And now, it wasn't just about paying off debt. It was about justice. I called the lawyer that same day. I asked about fraud, about financial abuse, about the name Tracy mentioned, an old shell company. The lawyer paused. "This changes things," he said. Yes, yes it did, because now I had something more powerful than anger. I had proof, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. The week after I got Tracy's message, I couldn't stop thinking about the filing cabinet in the garage. I hadn't touched it since Mark left. It sat wedged behind the lawn chairs and the old beach umbrella we never used. He always insisted he handled the paperwork, said it was simpler that way. I didn't ask questions, just trusted him. That trust had cost me everything. I pulled the filing cabinet into the kitchen. It was dusty, the kind of thick dust that only settles on things no one wants you to find. The key was still on the chain I kept in the junk drawer. Mark never thought I'd need it. The top drawer was filled with old tax returns, utility bills, and warranty receipts, everything benign. But the second drawer? That was different. It started with a folder labeled Business Expenses 2018. Inside were receipts, not just for office supplies and printer ink like I expected, but for dinners, hotel stays, and gifts. Jewelry, a designer handbag, 2 tickets to Rome. I've never been to Rome. There were statements with wire transfers I didn't recognize, a separate checking account I'd never seen. Then, wedged in the back, a manila envelope with a sticky note on top that read, "For safekeeping." Inside were 3 things: a notarized document transferring full ownership of a business I didn't know we owned, a life insurance policy with him as the sole beneficiary, and a printed photo of a woman holding a champagne glass with Mark's arm around her waist. She wasn't me. The rage that had burned in my gut turned cold. Cold like calculation. Cold like strategy. I boxed up the entire drawer, took it to the lawyer's office, and handed it over like a confession. He took one look at the documents and said, "This may not be just abandonment. This could be criminal." Criminal. The word echoed in my mind like a bell struck in an empty church. That same day, I sat down with my accountant, a new one I chose. We combed through every joint statement, every purchase, every account. I learned terms like marital fraud and forensic audit. He'd set it up like a chessboard, slow, careful, deliberate moves that led me into checkmate while he walked away with a clean slate. But he made one mistake. He left me standing, and I wasn't done playing. That weekend, Carla came over with a stack of magazines and a bottle of red. She kicked off her shoes, curled up on the couch, and said, "Tell me what we're doing." I smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "We're going to sell everything, piece by piece." We started with the big stuff. The antique armoire Mark insisted we keep but never touched. The designer watches he left behind. His golf clubs. His rare bourbon collection. I sold them all. Every item that held his scent, his touch, his memory. I let go of them like ash in the wind. And with every sale I wrote a note. A small one. I tucked it inside the packaging. Just one line. "This used to belong to a man who underestimated the woman he left behind." The money didn't fix everything, but it helped. Every dollar that came in was another rung on the ladder out of the pit he dug for me. Then came the call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. "Diane." His voice low, cautious. I didn't say a word. "Look, I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. We can talk. Work something out." He sounded nervous. "Good." I took a breath and said, "You left a lot of things behind, Mark. But the one thing you forgot. I know how to survive." And then I hung up. The morning after that call, I woke up to find my name in the mirror again. It might sound strange, but when you've been invisible for long enough, when every conversation you have is through lawyers, creditors, or pitying neighbors, you start to forget your reflection belongs to someone. I stared at myself for a long time. Lines I hadn't noticed before had taken root around my eyes, my mouth. But there was something else there too. A glint I hadn't seen since my 20s. It wasn't hope. Not quite. It was resolve. I made a decision that morning. If Mark was going to reduce me to a liability, I was going to become his greatest one. Not with threats. Not with vengeance. With visibility. I bought a domain, thuefeheleft.com. Simple, blunt, unforgettable. Then I started writing. Not just about Mark. About everything. About how women are expected to sacrifice and smile. About how financial abuse hides behind joint checking accounts. About how love can sometimes look like a leash disguised as safety. The post spread like wildfire. By week 3, I was being asked to speak at a women's business networking event in Atlanta. By week 5, I had 3 offers to turn my blog into a book. Every word I wrote was a brick in the new foundation I was building. But one post changed everything. I called it the cost of silence. It was raw, detailed, and packed with the receipts I'd found in that dusty filing cabinet. I didn't name Mark outright. I didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. The timeline, the facts, the betrayal, they all added up to a man who walked away without consequence. Until now. That post hit 100,000 views in 24 hours. And then I got the message from a woman named Claire. She worked in compliance for a regional bank, the same one that handles some of Mark's shell company transfers. She wrote, "I don't want to alarm you, but I think your husband forged your signature on a credit line application. We have the scanned copy. I saw your blog. I've been where you are. I want to help." My hand shook. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, who replied 3 minutes later. "We need to meet. Today." That meeting opened the door to a whole new world. One that didn't just deal in divorce settlements, but in charges, in legal consequences, in restitution. Turns out, if you dig long enough, liars leave a trail. Mark hadn't just abandoned me. He'd committed bank fraud, tax evasion, misrepresentation on legal forms that bore my name. My lawyer filed a motion the following week. If successful, it wouldn't just reduce the debt. It could reverse it, shift it, put it where it belonged, back on him. When I got home from the courthouse that day, I did something I hadn't done in months. I baked peach cobbler, Mark's favorite. But this time, I didn't make it for him. I wrapped up 2 slices, carried them next door to Mrs. Elkins, the widow who always waved but never spoke, and we sat on her porch in the fading light, eating cobbler and talking like old friends. It felt like healing, real healing, and somewhere between stories about her late husband and a shared laugh about bad hair dye, I realized something profound. Mark may have left me with debt, but I had something he'd never be able to buy back. My story, and I was just getting started. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. Everything about it seemed designed to make you feel small. The high ceilings, the fluorescent lights, the stiff back benches. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom B in my best navy blazer, the one I used to wear for parent-teacher meetings and community fundraisers. It still fit, but barely. It felt tighter somehow, like it too had endured this past year with me. My lawyer, Meredith, sat beside me flipping through a manila folder stuffed with printouts and statements, her glasses perched halfway down her nose. "He's not going to see this coming," she said without looking up. I nodded. My fingers twisted the strap of my purse. I wasn't afraid, not of Mark, not anymore. But the idea of facing him again? Of looking into the eyes of the man who'd left me drowning while he drank cocktails in Cancun? That was something else. He walked in 10 minutes before the hearing. Late, tan, confident. He wore a designer suit and a smirk that used to make me melt. Now it made me want to scream. He had a woman with him. Not the same one from the photo in the filing cabinet. Younger, tighter skin, wide-eyed, like someone who hadn't yet realized the man beside her was a tornado dressed in cufflinks. Mark's eyes met mine for the briefest second. I saw it then. That flicker of recognition, of fear. He didn't smile. Inside the courtroom, the judge was brisk. No nonsense. A woman, thankfully. We went first. Meredith laid everything out. The forged signatures, the unauthorized accounts, the evidence Claire from the bank had provided. The financial pattern lifted directly from Mark's past, Tracy's statement included. The judge listened without expression. When it was Mark's turn, his lawyer fumbled. Said the debts were mutual. Said I'd benefited from the business expenses. That's when Meredith dropped the final bomb. An audio clip. One I hadn't even known she had. A voicemail, left accidentally on our old landline. Mark, talking to someone, maybe one of his friends. Laughing. "She's too stupid to know what I'm doing with the money anyway. Give it a year, she'll fold." The courtroom went silent. Mark's new girlfriend stiffened beside him. Slowly, like she was realizing she'd boarded a train going nowhere good. The judge took a deep breath, folded her hands, and said, "I'm freezing all joint debt proceedings pending a full investigation. If even half of this proves accurate, Mr. Templeton, you won't just owe her money. You'll owe the state your freedom." It was better than any victory speech. Outside, Meredith patted my shoulder. "We've bought time, possibly more." I stood on the courthouse steps for a long time after everyone else left. Let the cold wind whip through my hair. Let the sun set on the worst chapter of my life. Then I went home, and I danced, alone, in the living room, barefoot on the hardwood. No music, just the sound of my own heartbeat reminding me, "You made it. You're still here." They don't tell you what happens after the courtroom victory. There's no confetti, no champagne toast, just the slow, uneven rhythm of rebuilding. And in my case, it started with a mop. I stood in the middle of the living room one morning, staring at the scuffed hardwood floors, the pile of unopened mail, and a vase of wilted flowers I kept forgetting to throw out. It looked like someone else's life, like the aftermath of a storm you saw on TV. But it was mine, so I cleaned. Not for guests, not to impress Mark like I used to. I cleaned for me, scrubbed the baseboards, washed the curtains, vacuumed the stairs. Each swipe of the sponge felt like a small declaration. I'm still here. As I worked, I found things I hadn't seen in years. A postcard from our first trip to New Orleans tucked inside a recipe book. A button from the coat I wore when we adopted our dog, Jasper. And behind the piano, dusty and half forgotten, a shoebox full of letters. Love notes. From Mark. Back when he used to write them. They were simple, sweet. He'd called me sunshine, said I made him feel grounded, said he couldn't imagine a world without me. I sat on the floor and read every single one. And when I finished, I folded them neatly, tucked them back in the box, and placed it in the donation pile. Because that woman, the one he wrote those letters to, she didn't exist anymore. A few days later, I got a check in the mail. A refund from one of the creditors, reversed because the account had been opened fraudulently. It wasn't much, but I stared at it like it was a winning lottery ticket. It meant someone somewhere believed me. I started attending financial literacy workshops at the community center on Wednesdays. At first, I just listened, but by the third week, I was answering questions, explaining terms, telling my story, and women leaned in. One of them, Maria, was in the middle of her own divorce. She'd been hiding money in her daughter's piggy bank just to keep it safe. I gave her a list of trusted attorneys and hugged her when she cried. She called me her lighthouse. The blog continued to grow. More emails, more stories. I was invited to speak at a conference in Denver, a panel on financial independence and starting over after loss. I stood in front of 400 people and told them how my husband emptied my accounts and left me with the consequences. But I also told them about the moment I stopped being a victim. And when I stepped off that stage, there was a line of women waiting to shake my hand. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the moonlight hits the kitchen tile just right, I think about what would have happened if Mark had stayed. If he'd never left that envelope. If we'd limped along another 10 years pretending things were fine. I might still be living someone else's version of my life. But now it's mine. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was elbow deep in flour, trying a new sourdough recipe, when the screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. These days, that could mean a reporter, a lawyer, or someone else who'd read my story and wanted to share their own. But this one, "Hi, is this Diane Templeton?" The voice was soft, tentative. "Yes," I said, wary. "This is Nora from First Shore Bank. I think we need to talk. About your ex-husband." The name rang a bell. It was one of the banks Mark had quietly opened a line of credit with. The one that hadn't responded to any of my inquiries. My breath caught, but I stayed calm. "What about him?" "We received a subpoena. He's under investigation for wire fraud and identity misrepresentation. Your name appears on several filings. We're working with the district attorney's office now." I thanked her, hung up, and stood in the middle of my kitchen, the smell of yeast and rising dough forgotten. He was finally going to face real consequences. And as if the universe wanted to punctuate that moment, the very next day, I ran into him. At the grocery store again. This time, he saw me first. He was standing by the bakery section, trying to pick out a pie. He looked older, tired. His tan had faded. The confidence he used to wear like a second skin had worn thin. When our eyes met, he didn't smirk. He froze. I walked right past him, headed for the produce aisle like he was nobody. But of course, he followed me. "Diane," he said, breathless. "Can we talk?" I turned slowly, met his eyes with a look I hoped was unreadable. "Talk." He looked around, then lowered his voice. "I made some mistakes." A laugh escaped before I could stop it. Not bitter, just stunned by the sheer gall. "Mistakes." I was overwhelmed. The business was failing. I didn't know how to tell you. "You didn't tell me," I said, "because you were too busy forging my name and planning your exit." His mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't think you'd survive it." There it was. The truth, twisted as always. "I didn't just survive," I said. "I thrived. And now I paused, stepped a little closer. "You're finally about to meet the mess you made." He looked genuinely rattled, like he hadn't expected this version of me, the one with her spine straight and her eyes clear. "I never wanted to hurt you," he muttered. "But you did," I replied. "And now, for the first time, someone else is holding the bill." I walked away without waiting for him to speak again. And this time, I didn't look back. That night, I took the fresh loaf of sourdough out of the oven, set it on the table, and poured myself a glass of wine. I ate alone in silence, not because I had no one, but because I had peace. And after everything, that was more than enough. 3 months after that grocery store encounter, a letter arrived. Not from a creditor, not from an attorney. From the state. The envelope was heavy, almost solemn, like it knew what was inside would shift the air. The charges had been filed. Fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, 7 counts total, each one a fingerprint of the mess Mark left behind. I read it on my porch, hands trembling slightly, not with fear, but with something close to justice. Mark had 30 days to respond. If he didn't, the assets would be frozen and a warrant would follow. I didn't dance this time. Instead, I packed a bag. Not to run, but to return. See, while Mark was out there crafting lies and licking his wounds, I'd found a job I loved, consulting part-time for a nonprofit helping women escape financial abuse. They read my blog, saw my story, and asked if I'd help build a program from scratch. It was small, humble, but full of purpose. And the best part? It meant I could leave the old house, the one with the creaky floors and bad memories. But before I did, I wanted to say goodbye on my own terms. I invited Carla, a few women from my workshop group, and even Maria, the woman with the piggy bank story. We made it a potluck, potato salad, cornbread, sweet tea, and laughter that rattled the windows. I opened the shoebox full of letters one last time, read a few out loud, and then tossed them in the fire pit Mark had insisted we needed, but never once used. One by one, the flames devoured his words. That night, I stood barefoot in the grass under a canopy of stars and made peace with the past. The house was never the villain. It was just the stage, and I was done playing a supporting role. The next morning, I left the keys on the counter and locked the door behind me. My new place was smaller, a 2-bedroom bungalow with white shutters and a tiny front garden. I planted lavender the first week and a tomato vine the next. Every night, I lit a candle on the windowsill and watched the light flicker against the glass. I felt safe, seen, whole. And just when I thought I'd closed every chapter, a knock came at the door. The knock came just after sunset. I was sitting on the porch, my tea lukewarm, the scent of lavender and evening rain curling through the air. The candle on my little table flickered gently, casting a soft glow over the cover of the book I'd been pretending to read for the last hour. I knew the knock wasn't trouble. Not anymore. But when I opened the door, I still wasn't ready to see her, Lynette. Mark's sister, older than him by 6 years, sharp-tongued, and always 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. She was wearing one of those neat little trench coats, beige and belted at the waist, like she'd stepped out of a catalog and not the shadow of my past. "Diane," she said, her voice soft in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Can I come in?" I studied her for a long second. The last time I saw her, she'd been stone-faced on the other end of a phone call, pretending she didn't know where Mark had gone, pretending I hadn't been her sister-in-law for nearly 2 decades. But something in her eyes now, some threadbare kind of regret, loosened the tension in my chest. I stepped aside. Sure. She walked in slow, glancing around my small bungalow like she was cataloging the woman I'd become. The walls were soft blue. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and clean linen. A crocheted throw draped over the couch. "My life, rebuilt piece by piece. This place, it suits you," she murmured, brushing her hand over the back of the armchair. "I like it here," I said simply. "What brings you?" She sat down, crossing her legs. Her hands were clasped tight, the way mine used to be when I was trying to hold in something sharp. "I came to say, I'm sorry." My body went still. She went on, her voice trembling just enough. "We believed him. Every lie. He said you were unstable, that you'd run up debt behind his back, that he was cleaning up your mess." She looked at me then, eyes full of unshed tears. "I should have known better. I should have called you. Should have asked." I sat across from her, folding my hands in my lap. "Why now?" She sighed, shaking her head. "Because he's being arraigned next week. 7 charges. They're saying there might be more. I've watched him manipulate people my whole life, but this what he did to you." She blinked fast. "I didn't know people could be so cruel. And I didn't want you to hear silence from our family again." For a moment, I said nothing. Because what was there to say? Apologies didn't rewind the clock. Didn't unevict me from the house I built or erase the tears I cried into bowls of ramen because I couldn't afford real groceries. But they mattered. A little. You were his sister, I said finally, but I was his wife. And if I couldn't see it coming, I don't blame you. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheek now. He's ruined himself. You came out the other side. I did, I said, and I'm not looking back. When she left, the door clicked shut with a soft finality. This one not like Mark's, not the sound of someone escaping, but of something finally, truly ending. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I danced. In the middle of the kitchen, barefoot, to a Sam Cooke song playing low on the radio. I twirled with my hands in the air, my laughter rising like steam off the tile floor. The next morning, I brewed fresh coffee and sat down with my notebook, the one I'd kept since the day Mark walked out. I flipped past the pages full of pain and numbers and bitterness to the very last one. I titled it, Final Balance, $498,202.83 in fraudulent debt, now absolved. 137 days of silence, 9 court filings, 2 attorney retainer payments, 1 foreclosure stopped, 0 apologies from him. And on the other side, my name, my voice, my life, a job that gives me purpose, a community that knows my worth, a front porch where I can breathe, a future. I closed the book and placed it in the drawer beneath my bedside table. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't need to remember anymore. Outside, the lavender swayed in the breeze. The mail arrived. No more red stamped letters, no more threats. Just a catalog, a utility bill, and a postcard from Maria in Santa Fe. I smiled. I had survived the worst days of my life. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I found myself again. Not the wife, not the liability, just Diane. And she was more than enough.